The Mortal Kombat franchise is one of the industry's most well-known video game series. It has an entry in every decade and a long stint of titles from 1999 to 2008, with a new game every year. Not only that, but it's one of the few examples of a franchise surviving the transition from arcade to home consoles, and from 2D to 3D rendered graphics. So there's no shortage of interesting and fun games within the franchise. But today, we want to tell you about DashFight's top 5 Mortal Kombat games. This is Arya from That Blasted Salami, and let's dig into it. Before we start, why not go ahead and subscribe to DashFight, and also ring that bell to be notified of every new video, be it our guides, deep dives, top 5s, and more. We have to start at the beginning, right? The year is 1991, and developers Ed Boon and John Tobias are tasked with creating a new fighting game for their employers, Midway Games. Midway was on an upswing at the time, quickly becoming one of the premier distributors of arcades in the United States. In just 10 months, the MK team, which included John Vogel and Mortal Kombat's beloved composer Dan Forden, brought the game to life. Within the year, Mortal Kombat was one of the most popular arcade machines. Its gory violence and over-the-top magic, ninja, and martial arts-inspired moves certainly captured the attention of overactive and sugar-fueled teenagers and their parents. You see, although the original Mortal Kombat might not hold up as well by today's standards in fighting games, there's something that sets it apart from most. It was at the forefront of the public eye for months following its meteoric rise on account of its gore and violence. At that time, the United States Congress went ahead with a series of hearings on video game violence. Mortal Kombat was at the forefront of those hearings too. Sure, if it wasn't MK, it would have been any number of other titles. Doom was part of those hearings as well, but Mortal Kombat was certainly a cut above the rest with its fatalities and blood spurts. And the fact that you were beating up other humans, and not just generic aliens or monsters. The topic of video game violence as a gateway to real-life violence still lives on today, though thankfully, people have come to understand this connection is tenuous at best. Mortal Kombat is etched into the history books now, inked with pixelated blood. Become DashFight supporter on Patreon. Gain ad-free browsing on our site. Click the link in the description. Although not the first 3D rendered game in the franchise, that title goes to Mortal Kombat 4. Deadly Alliance is one of the very few 3D fighting games with lateral movement in the Mortal Kombat franchise. This is a game bounding with innovative ideas. For starters, the addition of various fighting styles would later develop into what many MK players now know as variations. Even if the 3D gameplay didn't stick in the long run, the overall experimentation would go on to inform choices for MK developers down the line. Technology had also improved past the late 90s squares on triangles and into the more refined polygons with mapped textures and even post-processing effects. At the time, Deadly Alliance didn't break ground on any singular piece of tech, but it clearly made good use of the industry standard at the time renderware engine, which powered over 20 games across nearly all consoles in 2002 alone. Deadly Alliance is also in this top 5 on account of the great characters it introduced, like Kenshi and Frost. At the same time, the game's roster was a bit of a risk, as it also chose to do away with other characters that many considered central to Mortal Kombat, like Shao Kahn and Liu Kang. The somewhat stagnant formula of the series, which could be partially attributed to its coin-operated roots, was finally broken. Mortal Kombat showed it had the ability to leverage its fighting gameplay to tell a story within it. Yes, it was a bit sloppy, cheesy, and campy, but those were always Mortal Kombat's strongest points anyway. Before we continue with our list, we think it's worth taking a short detour to Injustice. After Midway Games filed for bankruptcy in 2009, Warner Brothers decided to take on most of the assets of the team, including the core of the development team, who went on to work at the newly formed NetherRealm Studios, or Warner Bros. Games Chicago as they were known for a time. We'll get to their contributions to the Mortal Kombat franchise soon enough, don't worry. But it's also worth appreciating the team's hard work on what was a dream for many of them. working on a comic book universe game, DC's take on fighting games, Injustice, and its sequel, Injustice 2. In these multimedia comic book dominated times, it's easy to look back and think that a DC fighting game was inevitable. But in 2013, it was a hard pull-off, and NetherRealm had only released one multi-platform fighting game before. It was a risk, but the game was pretty great. And even to this day, Injustice 2 is beloved by both comic book fans and the FGC alike. A rare diamond in the rough from before the ever-growing media bloat of comic book-based media. Continuing on from that, Mortal Kombat has been enamored by 80s and 90s action movies as well. Rambo, Alien, and many others. It's no secret that pretty much everyone involved in the development of a Mortal Kombat title has a deep love of said movies, as well as comics, as seen by Mortal Kombat vs. DC Comics, released over 5 years before X. But X is the title that really hams it up, the one that truly captures that aesthetic. The game was critically acclaimed at the time of its release, in large part thanks to NetherRealm Studios refining the incredibly fun gameplay of their prior entry. Many called it the culmination and refinement of everything that the franchise had tried to achieve so far. It's also worth highlighting the fact that X gave us many new characters. Like Deadly Alliance before it, some have now fallen off in the public eye, but still have players holding out for a chance to see them again in the future. The likes of Cassie Cage, Kotal Khan, Aaron Black, and Takeda all had their debut here. And yes, Jackie Briggs too. But there's one crucial point about Mortal Kombat X. It was clear, even as it released, that the times were changing. The standalone games of the past were now turning to a new system of content delivery. Thus we come to our number 2, Mortal Kombat 11. Released in 2019, the latest entry in the series is another great example of everything that Mortal Kombat is and represents, even as it's evolved throughout the years and across all the titles we've talked about. The fact that it won the Game Awards and DICE's Fighting Game of the Year, along with nominations for its sound design and overall composition, are cherries on top of what was a resounding launch success. But what truly propels MK11 up this list is its longevity. It's been less than a year since NRS announced it would stop content development for the game after the release of the Ultimate version. By this point, it had introduced 12 characters to its roster, and its early games as a service model meant a great deal of cosmetic unlockables, many of which were available by playing through the crypt. Today we might be closer to a new MK game than to the release of MK11, but until that game comes out and we see the next step of the franchise, MK11 is easily one of the best entries in the series. Reboots are scary. From a fan's point of view, they could mean the end of many storylines that have been in the works for a long time, or retconning a wonderful part of the fantasy world constructed. Even beyond the aesthetics of the games, the core mechanics can be affected by this shift. On top of that, the fact that Midway Games was reformed under a huge media conglomerate in Warner Brothers, and for the first few years of its existence, the fact that they didn't work on a direct MK title was a bit worrying. But they did it. With a back-to-basics approach, the crazy passionate folks at NetherRealm Studios successfully rebooted one of the most beloved fighting game franchises by focusing on and distilling everything that people loved about Mortal Kombat in its heyday. Even if by today's standards, we can safely say that it isn't the best out there, it continues to be the cornerstone over which the current weight of the series, with its games, mobile spin-offs, movies, and animated series, stands off of. That's why the 2011 reboot of Mortal Kombat deserves to be number 1 in our list. It's the pivotal game in the franchise that set up what followed in the decade after, and likely what will continue in the decade to come. So that's our top 5 best games in the Mortal Kombat franchise. Do you agree? Disagree? Let us know in the comments. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to DashFight for more content like this in the future. Cheers all, this was Arya from That Blasted Salami, wishing you a great day.